Bienvenido a otro video del Colegio Boston. No olvides suscribirte, activar la campanita, darle like y compartir.
Hello, good day. How are you today, students? I hope that you are having a wonderful, fantastic, amazing, and extraordinary day. I gotta tell you, I'm having that perfect time because I can get to see you and you can get to see me one more time. That's beautiful, you know, that's like the most precious thing that we can have. Contact teacher, student, teacher. That is like perfect for these days. I know that we are suffering in these moments because it's difficult to see one another face to face, but don't worry, this will all be over pretty soon. Now, on the meanwhile, we gotta say thank you, Colegio Boston Cancun, for giving us the opportunity of having this kind of conversation, breaking the fourth wall, the fourth dimension, you know, if you know what I mean, and having this interaction one-to-one. I mean, probably not face-to-face, but yes, one-to-one. So let's get started with today's video. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is like a versus, you know, like a match. We have defining relative clauses on one side, and we have non-defining relative clauses on the other side. Hey, bang. Are you ready for the fight? I am. Are you ready for the fight? I hope that you are. Let's check out some of this grammar, shall we? It says, defining relative clauses. We use defining relative clauses to give essential information about someone or something, or, and this is very important, information that we need in order to understand what or who is being referred to, okay? We're going to have this one with a different color because this one is like very important. What or who is being referred to, okay? I don't know if you remember my last video, but in the last video, we were talking about defining relative clauses, you know? You remember, like relative clauses, but that you have the relative pronoun, and we said that it was to give extra information, like extra information that was like necessary for you to have a sentence. If you remember in the past video, I say 2 sentences in only 1 sentence. Now, in this case, we're going to talk about that, but a little bit deeper, like a little bit further, you know, like to give better explanations. Now, it says, a defining relative clause usually comes immediately after the noun it describes, okay? Normally, it's like immediately after the noun it describes, usually, okay? Not all the time, so usually. Now, it says, we usually use a relative pronoun. Example is this e.g. For you, if you don't know it, e.g. it means example given, okay? The example that I give you. Example given, we have who, we have that, and we have where. You remember these ones, right? We checked them in the past video. If you check the past video and you're checking this video of this week, then you know, I know what the teacher is talking about. If you do not know what I am talking about, please be sure to watch the past video. The past video, it was about relative clauses. It was like an introduction to relative clauses. Today, we're going to be talking about the other part, like the dark side. You know, like the dark mode of the Skywalker version. Well, if you know what I mean. Now, continuing with, it says, we usually use a relative pronoun, example given, who, that, or where, to introduce a defining relative clause, okay? This is very important. And mostly, one that is like super important is this part, that. That is a relative pronoun that we only use when we're talking about defining relative clauses, okay? Now, when I say defining relative clauses, I don't mean that we are going to define, that we're going to give a definition. No, it doesn't just refer to that. It's like a specific name, defining relative clauses, and later on, we're going to check the non-defining relative clauses, okay? So we need to be like very specific into that part. Now, erasing this part, let's continue with the next one. It says in here, for example, The relative clause is in a square and the person or thing being referred to is underlined. Okay? Do you see the squares? Do you see? I mean, I'm pretty sure that you can see that it's underlined. You see the people, you see some TVs, you see where, okay? So, well, we're going to check that in a moment. Don't worry. Well, it says the relative clause is in a square. So, where are the squares? Do you see a square here, square there, a square there? No? Okay. Let's check the sentence. It says, they're the people who want to buy our house. They're the people who want to buy our house. So what is the relative pronoun? Do you remember which were the relative pronouns? I mentioned it before. It was who, it was that, or it was where. Okay? So in the first one, is it there? Is it the people? Is it who? No, yes. It's this one, who. Okay, so it says in here, the relative clause is in a square, okay? So the square in here we have it is who. They're the people who want to buy our house. Now, who refers to people, obviously to the word that is before. In this case, it's like super transparent, it's super simple, no problem, you see it in there, there's no issue. The next one, here are some TVs that have been affected. We're talking about TVs, you know, like televisions. Well, in this case, nowadays it's like screens. But if any TVs, we're talking about objects. So we have to use the relative pronoun that, okay? If you remember also from the past videos, who is only for people, that can be for people, for places, for objects. In this case, we're referring to an object. Now, it says, they should make the gathering of food in a place where, where is underlined, is that correct? I mean, in the instruction it says, the relative clause is in a square and the person or thing being referred to is underlined. So if I say where and I leave where as the underline, that is not correct. I did that on purpose for you to check, okay? Remember, we're breaking the 4th dimension. I'm talking to you, yes, to you. And if you check that mistake, congratulations. Bravo, you did it. If you didn't, don't worry, we're going to do it. So we have it in here. It says where it must be with a rectangle. Let's say a square, but it's more like a rectangle, depending on the word. Now, which part should be underlined? Should it be underlined the part where it say they should, the make, the gathering of food in a place? Well, we're talking about where, so they should make the gathering is not referring to a place. Of food, that is an object. In a preposition, a is an article. So we have place. Very good. Place is the word that needs to be underlined, and where it's the word that needs to be in a square, okay? Well, like a rectangle, I know, but it's supposed to be a square, okay? Now, let's continue with the next part. We have that in the next one, we're going to see and talk about this question. Remember the video about being fluent in English? In the past video, I told you, you can speak like normal English or you can speak fluent English, okay? And what we want as teacher is for you to be speaking fluent, natural, native English, okay? And for you to do that, there are 2 ways. Either you were born in the States or you have an excellent teacher like Teacher Victor, and it's going to give you some tips. It says in here, in spoken English, in defining relative clauses, we often use that instead of who or which. This is very common in informal speaking, okay? Now, then again, I tell you, do you remember that in the past video, in the previous video, I told you about the fact of fluent English? And I also told you that in some cases, you can use who, but it was preferable to use that. Well, that's because in the spoken English, in the fluent English, that is the relative pronoun that we can use more. Okay, I know it's repetitive, but we can say that is the relative pronoun which we can use more. There we go. There we don't have a repetition. We don't want pleonasms. Okay, so in here, it's important to mention that it's in informal speaking, okay? Let's have it with hearts because it means something. It's like something special. Only in formal speaking, we can replace that with who, or who with that mostly, because it sounds more natural, more fluent, okay? If you use who, or if you use that to refer to people, no problem, but that is more fluent. Now it says, my English teacher, in here extra hearts because English teachers, we're the best, I know. My English teacher is the person who taught me about grammar, okay? So in this case, remember who is the relative pronoun? My English teacher is the person. The person, in this case, we're referring to the subject, okay? So all of this, my English teacher is the person who taught me about grammar. Now, in this case, my English teacher is the person, the same, exactly the same sentence. It says my English teacher is the person that taught me about grammar, okay? If you check, it's exactly the same sentence, but it sounds more natural if you say it with that. And it sounds more natural because it's something that you speak, okay? I prefer in writing that you use who, but in speaking, you can be using that, and that is not an issue, okay? So shall we continue? No? You see something? Do you see another error? I noticed an error. If you notice the error, congratulations. If you didn't notice the error, come on, people. There is an error in there. You know that I am a grammar error mistaken corrector, and I cannot let it pass. But I also hit another error in that part, in that sentence. Do you see the error? No? Come on. Well, I'm going to have it in here for you. It says my English teacher in the first sentence, and it's with capital letter. But then it's my English teacher here, and it's not with capital letter. What happened in there? What happened is that I hit that for you. So this one is incorrect, okay? Remember, proper names, we need to write them with capital letter. So it's preferable that I say English with capital letter. Having to say English without the capital letter, poof, terrible, terrible situation. Don't let it happen. And if you did it, well, it's okay the first time, but the second time, no, you cannot do it. Now, having said that, let's continue with the next part. It says, non-defining relative clauses. We use non-defining relative clauses to give extra information about the person or thing. And you're like, but teacher, in defining relative clauses, we give extra information. In non-defining relative clauses, we give extra information. So what's the difference? I mean, is there a difference? Well, in here, we say, this is not necessary information, okay? We need to be very specific into that part. We say, this is not necessary information, okay? When you're talking about a defining relative clause, it's something that is like extra necessary. But when you're talking about non-defining relative clauses, we're giving extra information, but if we don't give that extra information, it's okay. Nothing happens. The sentence has a meaning, has a sense, has a logic, and it's okay. There's no problem. But with the other part, defining is like a must. You must have that extra information. In here, in non-defining, don't define it like, don't worry. If you give the information, that's good. If you don't give the information, that's good, no problem, okay? Let's continue with this part. It says, we don't need it to understand who or what is being referred to, okay? We don't need this extra information to understand who or what we are talking about, okay? This is very important. This is what I'm telling you. You don't need the extra information. You know who you are talking about, you know what is it that you're talking about, but maybe you want to give like extra information. So if you want to give extra information that is not necessary, but that complements your idea, you can use non-defining relative clauses, okay? Now, it says, we always use a relative pronoun, who, where, or which, to introduce a non-defining relative clause. Now, do you remember? I mean, I'm always telling you this, but let's remind. Do you remember that I told you that there was a very specific relative pronoun that you only use in defining sentences? Well, defining relative clauses. If you don't remember, it's in here. I'm going to write for you. That. Okay, that's like a warning. In this case, that is only for defining relative clauses, not for non-defining relative clauses. That's like a plus, okay? So please keep that in mind. We're going to check some examples later on. Now, continuing with that part, it says, for example, the relative clause in a square is in a square and the person or thing being referred to is underlined. Remember that this dynamic? We need to make in a square the information about the relative clause, okay? Now, Claire, who I work with, is doing the London Marathon this year. Not Claire, I work with, is doing the London Marathon this year, okay? Relative pronoun, we have it in here. The relative pronoun is something that is necessary. But also, in this case, if you can check, we're using a comma. So this one is a difference. In the defining relative clauses, we don't need the comma, but in here we need it. And why do we need it? Because we are like kind of separating that extra information that is not necessary, but that we want to give, okay? Now, for example, maybe it's kind of confusing for you. Let's say, if I do it like this, Claire, well, let me erase this one for you so that it's like clearer for you. It says, Claire, who I work with, is doing the London Marathon this year. But what happens if I only leave it like this? Claire is doing the Marathon London this year, like that. Does this sentence make sense? Yes, it does. No problem. Claire is doing the London Marathon this year. There is no need for the extra information. And that is why non-defining relative clauses are different from defining relative clauses. It says in here, doctors use the nowadays medicines which accounted for 70% of cancers treated in the Western world. Now, if I say, doctors use the nowadays medicine, like only starting from here, well, like finishing in here, and then we have the period. Always remember to have the period. Doctors use the nowadays medicine. They are using it. It's something that is a good information, and it's not necessarily the extra information. So if we remove it, nothing happens. The sentence still has a logic, a sense, is real, no problem, okay? Now, it says in the next part, Alice, who has worked in Brussels and London, will be starting a teaching course in the autumn. The same again. We say Alice, and we start erasing from this part. Alice will be starting a teaching course in the autumn. Is this a good sentence? Does it have a logic? Is it real? Probably yes. But I mean, grammatically speaking, it sounds good, right? Yeah, it sounds good. Why? Because we're talking about non-defining relative clauses. So keeping in that in mind, non-defining relative clauses give extra information that is not necessary, but that maybe gives you another context. But if you eliminate that information, nothing happens, okay? I'm going to erase this part. And now you see Claire, who I work with, or doctors use the nowadays medicine, which accounted for 70% of cancers treated in the Western world, or who has worked in Brussels and London. Well, if you see, this is like extra information. Is it necessary? Maybe not. But it's something that we want to complement with. Now, it says, Warning, warning, warning. The information in a defining relative clause is essential, okay? In a defining relative clause is essential the extra information. So we cannot leave out the relative clause, okay? Now, the information in a non-defining relative clause is extra information which isn't essential. So we can leave it out of this relative clause and nothing happens, okay? The sentence still makes sense, it's correct, it's good, nothing happens. So have that in mind. Those two definitions. Defining clauses, we need the extra information. Non-defining clauses, we don't need the extra information. Okay? Now, let's make a comparison. It says, the soldier who had gold stripes on his uniform seemed to be the most important one. Okay? Now, in this case, it says, we have the soldier who is our relative pronoun. The soldier who had gold stripes on his uniform seemed to be the most important one. It says, a defining relative clause which we can leave out. Without this information, we do not know which soldier the speaking is referring to. So imagine that we eliminate, we say, okay, I'm going to do it like the teacher says. We're going to eliminate this information. So it goes like this. From information eliminated. The soldier seemed to be the most important one. The soldier seemed to be the most important one. The soldier of video games, the soldier from my family, the soldier from World War II, World War I, World War III. Which soldier? Ah, the soldier from the movie? I don't know. So in this case, we need to be very specific. We cannot eliminate the information. It's essential information, okay? Which is introduced, obviously, by the relative pronoun who, okay? Now, it says, the tour party was weakened when Gordon Hamilton, who played in the World Cup team, withdrew yesterday because of a back injury, which kept him out of the 5 national championships. It says, non-defining relative clauses, which we can leave out, we can eliminate. The tour party was weakened when Gordon Hamilton withdrew yesterday because of a back injury. Let's say, who played in the world team, which kept him out of the 5 championships. We eliminate the information that is presented with a relative pronoun, and let's try to read the sentence. The tour party was weakened when Gordon Hamilton withdrew yesterday because of a back injury. And here we can have probably like a period and finish that idea. Is that idea a good idea? Yes. Does it have a logic? Yes. Is it good grammatical speaking? Yes. Can we eliminate them by then this information? Yes. Can we add it up? Can we have that extra information? Yes. If we don't eliminate the extra information and we give it, that's good. Only if you check, and this is something that is like super important for you, that I need to please check. In here, the soldier who had gold stripes on his uniform seemed to be the most important one. In this part, do you see that there is a comma? There is no comma. Now, the tour party was weakened when Gordon Hamilton, in here we have a comma. Playing the World Cup team withdrew yesterday because of a back injury. And then we have another comma, okay? So every time that you are going to present an idea that is from a non-defining relative clause, you need to have a comma. When you're going to talk about a sentence that is with a defining relative clause, the commas are not necessary, okay? How are we doing so far? So far, so good? Now, it says we can use that instead of who, whom, or which in defining relative clauses, but not in non-defining relative clauses. I think anyone who speaks in public is nervous beforehand. I think anyone that speaks in public is nervous beforehand. No problem. Her car, which was very old, broke down just after 5 miles. It's good. We're talking which. Not her car that was very old broke down after. In here it sounds weird, you know? In here it's not correct. In this case, if we're talking about defining or non-defining relative clauses, we need to be very specific on which we are going to use. When I say her car, which was very old, it's a good sentence. When I say her car that was very old, terrible. This that is not the correct one. Just please have that in mind. Those tips are going to be very helpful for you. Okay? Now, if any, thank you very much for watching this video. Remember to send your homework to your teacher, write in your complete name, the day, the week, the month, and a reference to the exercise that you are giving or that you are presenting for your teacher. This makes it easier for your teacher to know which part of the homework you are doing. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.